Welcome back to the podcast. Welcome back to Theory and Theology. Here in this podcast, we talk about culture, religion, spirituality, different topics along those lines. And, I just rewatched a movie called Holy Rollers with Jesse Eisenberg. I wanted to talk some about that movie. People who kind of know how I schedule out my weeks, sometimes on between Friday nights and Saturday nights, I like to just take a break from work and that kind of stuff, and I mostly like to view different types of movies and stuff, content that's related to religion, even if it's not religious necessarily or spiritual necessarily. But I think sometimes we can get lessons from all kinds of things. So, spoiler alert. I'm about to go through this whole movie and explain kind of what I think about it. I've seen it multiple times, but I have been trying to watch it for a while, and today I just remembered that you could just Google something and it shows you all the platforms where you can watch it, and it's on Amazon Prime, at least at the moment, and I didn't really know it was on there, but it's on there with ads. So I rewatched it tonight, and because I wanted to have a fresh view, because I haven't seen it in a while, but it is one of my favorite movies. So okay, so spoiler. It's going to be all spoiler. So if you haven't watched this movie, if you like movies that are about religious people that try to stick to their strict traditions and living in mainstream modern society, then maybe watch the movie first, because you might actually like it, and then come back to this podcast episode and listen. If you're not going to listen, if you're not going to watch it, maybe check out a trailer on YouTube first, or just some clips of the movie, so you can kind of get a vibe for what I'm going for when I'm talking about it. And there's some points I want to hit on, but basically I'm just going to be spoiling the whole thing. Again, this is my opinion, just kind of my things that stuck out to me. I don't usually do a lot of movie reviews, movie kind of spoilers or anything, but I wanted to try it and see kind of how it goes. So this movie, Holy Rollers, is basically, the story goes, it's a Hasidic or ultra-Orthodox Jewish main character, and he's about 20 years old in this movie, and he's at a pivotal time in his life. So he lives with his family. He works with his father in a textiles fabric shop. His father owns his own business. He can sustain the whole family with that business. They live in New York. I think he said he works in Manhattan, but I don't know if he lives in Crown Heights. And he's a very religious Jew. And living in New York, he's exposed to just the city itself. I mean, New York isn't a cheap city. The movie's set in the late 90s, but it's not a late 90s movie. It's way newer than that. And so basically, the main character's name is Sammy Gold, and he's 20 years old, meaning that he's near the age where the Rebbe, the main head of his sect, of his group that lives there, the head person kind of decides who is going to get married when, or who would get approved, or what kind of job roles somebody's going to take. So at the beginning of the movie, Sammy's at a point where he likes a certain woman in his synagogue who's friends with his sister, and he hasn't done any kind of their style of dating. He hasn't been told by the Rebbe or started meeting with the Rebbe about his future. At the beginning of the movie, he's just like, okay, like he knows it's coming up, but he also knows, okay, it's all in the hands of the Rebbe. It's all in the hands of his father. These are the people who are going to be deciding his future, and the next steps of his adult life. And so, mind you, he lives in New York. He lives in the city. He's not living, it's not like the Amish who live like out in the middle of like other places, like in like secluded away. He's in the main part of the city. The shop has customers that are maybe Spanish speaking or other different cultures. When he's walking around, and there's black people walking around in that part of the city. There's just different interactions with different types of people, but mostly they tend to all stay to themselves. Like the ultra-Orthodox groups tend to stay to themselves within their own group. They socialize within their own groups, or just within other Jewish groups for the most part that are ultra-Orthodox preferred, but otherwise mostly socializing with Jewish people, and not too much of their life is really spent too much interacting outside of like work. Most of the social circles tend to be their own group, but they're not completely ignorant of like other cultures. So the main dilemma at the beginning of the movie is that Sammy notices his family doesn't have any money, too much money. They live in it seems like a 4-bedroom or so apartment in New York, or a little house in New York, maybe a duplex or something, townhouse. I don't know what the difference is, but it looks like a 2-story house in New York. They have neighbors who are an elderly woman who doesn't work with her 2 sons. One of the sons is older than Sammy, but kind of like a little bit of a mentor in a way. He's kind of like showing him the ropes, maybe a bit of a bad influence, but Sammy kind of looks up to him because he's older and more mature, and kind of introduces him to things that he doesn't really know about. So for example, in Sammy's house there's no television, and he opens his curtains a little bit, and Yosef leaves his window curtains a little bit open, so that there is a gap between the 2 houses, because Sammy's able to look out his window into Yosef's window, and he's able to see the television. And so, Yosef watches shows like with Vanna White or like other people who kind of have like cleavage and like breasts and things like that showing, and that kind of exposes Sammy to kind of that type of thing, whereas in his own household, his parents are kind of like not trying to do all that, not expose anybody to that, not even have that option in the house. On the other hand, that household where Yosef lives, the neighbor, he's the one who is paying for his younger brother that's about Sammy's age, as well as his mother and himself to live in this house in New York. He says he's the one who pays the mortgage. He's the one who pays, the bills and the utilities and all that kind of stuff. And so the movie's kind of set around religion and money, tradition and money. So, Sammy, starts noticing, okay, the stove in our house doesn't work. They have to use like pliers to like, get the, what do you call it when it's like, I don't know what the word is. I'm blanking on the word completely, about like the setting that the stove has to be on for the, to be able to kind of light the stove. That setting doesn't really work unless they use the pliers, and then they have to light a match. And then it works. So there's that doesn't work. I think there was a problem with the door. I don't remember. It's not a very big house. It's a small house. And it's Sammy, who's like 20, his sister, who's a little bit younger than him, and then a very young brother who's probably like 5 or 6 years old, and then his two parents, mom and dad. So about 5 of them living in one house. It must have multiple bedrooms, because the young son does have his own bedroom. Sammy has his own bedroom, and I'm gonna assume the parents have a bedroom where the middle child, which is the daughter, doesn't sleep in their room. But there's no part in the show that shows like where her bedroom is or anything. It's kind of just like assumed. It doesn't show the parents' bedroom either. It's kind of like assumed. And so there's that. And, they're living in this small house. But, they're making it work. And so at the company, at the shop, Sammy works with his dad. And, he's either going to take over his dad's shop, work with his dad permanently, and then take over his dad's shop, or become a rabbi. So, Sammy doesn't really know if he really wants to be a rabbi. It sounds like there are people like the Rebbe and his father who want him to be a rabbi, and the lady that he is interested in marrying, that seems to be something she might prefer. But Sammy does mention at a certain point that he plans to just stay and work with his father, and that's going to be fine. And so it comes to time when, Sammy starts realizing, he needs more money to become more impressive in the eyes of the other family of his, of this lady he wants to marry. And their family, the last name is the Lazars. So the Lazar daughter, he wants to like be able to impress her. And so Yosef, the next door neighbor, starts telling Sammy about like women, a little bit more about women, about like how they might want flashy things, or like that, he might need to make some money. And like he kind of puts in his mind, like, how do you think I pay for all this, And Sammy sees that, Yosef has a Rolex on, and, he doesn't really see the difference between, like, okay, like, Yosef looks religious, he's dressed religious. Yeah, maybe he's watching TV on the Sabbath, watching, like, stuff with boobs on it and stuff, or whatever. But, he still seems to look up to Yosef. And the younger brother, Yosef's younger brother, starts telling Sammy, just kind of steer clear of him. He's a bad example. You kind of see at certain points where the mom is kind of like mad at Yosef and kind of like almost yelling at him, and he kind of leaves the house, like storms out, just kind of like, who knows what the argument was about. But like, the family dynamic in that household wasn't very there was some tension there. And so you start seeing all of these like cultural aspects of like how money is important. Sammy gets permission to go on this date with, well, it's kind of a date, but like it's considered like a shidduch, but it's like arranged for him to meet the Lazar daughter. So this takes place in the kind of like a parlor of the Lazar family, and Sammy's sitting on one side of the couch, the daughter's sitting on the other side of the couch, and the parents are in the doorway of that room. And so these two are kind of just talking, just casually. But before that, Sammy wanted to meet her, and he told his sister, like, I want to meet her. And the sister's like, you're not supposed to like talk to each other before, that's not how this works. So, there's a time like at the synagogue where after, the service is over, the two kids, like his younger brother Yankel, and I guess the Lazar daughter's other younger brother or whatever, they start playing with each other, and this is like after the service where people are just kind of mingling around, and then Sammy goes over to them and says like, oh, I see the kids were playing together. And then the sister's kind of like she says something that kind of lets him know to get out of here, take your uncle to the bathroom or whatever, to kind of like get him out of the way. And so he leaves then, and then he meets her because he was scheduled to meet her. And then they did that thing like with the couch, and they're sitting there and they're talking, and she starts asking him, where are you planning on, are you gonna study at the Kollel? And he's like, well, I already work in Manhattan, but the Rebbe's gonna tell him if he's gonna, become a rabbi or work in textiles or what. And then she starts asking, things like, do you prefer basketball? And he's like, oh, you saw me, you've seen me, playing basketball. And she's like, oh, no, because the parents were like standing right there listening. And so he's just kind of like, all right, and then she starts saying how she like watches over her brothers and sisters, and he says that he wants a lot of kids, and so does she. And like he says he wants 5, she says she wants 8. And then he starts realizing that's going to cost a whole lot of money. And that, you can tell by his reaction to that like, that's a lot of money. And he's starting to think, okay, if I'm working for my dad in textiles, how am I going to, make money? Like, he's walking around with duct tape on his shoe. The stove doesn't work. He's trying to haggle in the shop to like make a few extra bucks here and there. It seems like the relationship at work with his father and him is kind of tense. The father's more interested in keeping prices low to get returning customers. Sammy's more interested in, getting the maximum amount of money you can for each purchase. They don't see eye to eye on that. It seems like, you don't really see it too often other than like once. But, it seems like Sammy does really gravitate towards, wanting to be good at his job and wanting to be good at work and being told that he's doing a good job. And so, when he starts to talk to Yosef more, the neighbor that had the Rolex and everything, the Hasidic neighbor with the Rolex, he was kind of like, oh, like, they start talking money, and he's kind of like, he offers him a job saying, if you want to work with me, we're delivering medicine, from Europe, like, just, I can pay you $1,000, all expenses paid, you make $1,000 off the trip. All you're doing is like getting medicine and bringing it back to New York. And so he starts to realize, he can do that job. But his father starts realizing, okay, well, you're not showing up at work for me. You're missing dinner. Like, where are you? Like, he's not really home as much. Mind you, he lives with his parents. And so they know, he works with his father and he lives at the house. So it doesn't make too much sense for him to be somewhere else on a regular basis, right? And so, he starts getting into this habit of working for Yosef, who introduces him to this other guy, this Israeli guy, like in Amsterdam, and they basically are, importing pills from Amsterdam to the U.S., but, to a certain extent, Sammy's kind of kept in the dark a little bit about it. He starts getting into other things, once the Lazar family officially is like, we're going to go with somebody else. We're not going to, go with Sammy as a possible husband for our daughter. He starts getting a little upset by that, and there's more tension between him and his father. There's more tension at his like, there's just basically more tension, like, at, his, between him and his friend, which is Yosef's younger brother. The younger brother stopped working for Yosef after the first time, after he knew, like, once they found out that what they were smuggling was a type of drug, because one of the people who picked them up mentioned something about drugs, and then they were like, what, you said it was medicine, like, what the heck, and so, Yosef's brother tells Sammy, just give Yosef back the money, because he made like $1,000, but you can tell, like, Sammy's like, okay, I don't want to give this money back. And then you start seeing him more and more, getting more and more involved in that. And he was keeping it up for a while, and then it starts affecting him, at home. It starts affecting him, in the synagogue, where he's like, I don't know if he was like hungover or what, and he's like almost nodding off during the service, and his dad's kind of nudging him to like wake him up, and like, it's just a bad impression. And he starts getting into, there's a lady that is kind of like with the main boss guy in Amsterdam. He kind of likes her, and she's really kind to him, nice to him. She's like friendly with him, takes a lot of ecstasy, is like kissing him and flirting with him, and that kind of thing. And things start getting harder and harder for Sammy, because he's like making all this money, but then he's also hiding that fact that he's making money. Like, he can't really show it. He can't really, show, like, some of the new clothes he gets in Amsterdam, or the sneakers he has, or the money that he has. He can't really just be buying stuff. He's just stockpiling money because, like, he can't just be flashing money around. At a certain point, he buys his parents a new stove, and, once he comes home, when the stove's getting delivered, his parents and family are, like, sitting at the table, and the dad's just like, I don't want any part of this. Like, what are you doing? Like, you've been lying. And then Sammy denies it, and he's like, no, I haven't been lying. Like, what are you saying? And his dad kind of kicks him out, and he's just, nobody's really too happy. He's caught between this world. So once his dad kicks him out, he ends up cutting off his they're called, like, payas, or, like, the side curls that he has. He ends up cutting them off. It's kind of like an outward sign that he's not really, like acting religious anymore. He doesn't wear the same, like, black suit with white shirt. You don't really see him wearing the same garb anymore. Like, similar, like, still button down shirts and, like, slacks and jackets and stuff, but not the same Hasidic style ones. And you can tell he's trying to do something different. Like, let's go into this, mainstream world. And he starts recruiting, like, young Hasidic people who need money, Hasidic like young families who might need money, people who, aren't suspicious. I mean, they look Hasidic. Nobody's going to be like, oh, you have drugs, but, there's a point where, well, I probably should say it somewhere in there, Yosef, the guy next door, his younger brother ends up marrying the Lazar daughter that Sammy really was in love with and had a crush on and really had his hopes set on marrying. Her family disapproved of Sammy and approved for the neighbor, and he was confused by that, because he's like, well, what's going on with that? Like, he doesn't have any money. Like, why? Like, he has less money than Sammy even, like, and they mentioned, like, they want a shepherd to keep her away from the wolves. It had nothing to do with the money. It was just kind of the type of person that they wanted for the daughter. And so basically, at the end, Sammy realizes, like, that the girl that he knows from Amsterdam, that's with the main boss, that, she has kind of been toying with him, making comments like, oh, like, we should run away together. And he kind of took it almost seriously, like, okay, like, there's this girl, I like her, like, we can do this, we can leave together, and then she's just like, wait, like, what are you saying? Like, you're young, and, like, he's like, well, how old are you? Like, and she doesn't say how old she is, but she was, if not older in age, she's older in, just what she's dealing with and the types of people she's around. Just her life experience is way different than his. I mean, there's no real way to compare, right? But it's like her life experience is way different than his life experience. And so, I mean, and a lot of times religious people are seen almost as, like, sheltered. But the interesting thing about this story is that even though maybe someone like, a Hasidic Jew like Sammy, might not be fully sheltered like that, like, not like Amish people would be so much, like, they're just not really a part of you know, living their lives like mainstream Americans, but you know, they're very much in the middle of the culture, and a big part of the city, and where they live in New York, they're a big part of the city. And so it's like, you know, it's not like he doesn't know about things at all, you know. He just doesn't live his life, you know, focused on all that, but he does get pretty focused in on money. You know, after he realizes he's not going to be with that lady, you know, he goes kind of harder at work, and he starts, you know, working for this boss, and he starts kind of, you know, trying to assert himself more and be a little bit more, you know, taking more initiative. And, you know, the boss doesn't like that. He's like, no, we're not partners. Like, he tries to like put him in his place. And Sammy doesn't like that. He's like, okay, all this time he was loving how this boss was saying to him, you're doing good, you did good, you know, like, you did a good job, you know, I like the way you work. He even showed up in Manhattan once, out in front of his father's shop when they were opening, and mentioned to his father how good of a job they were doing. And like, he didn't tell him exactly about the pills and stuff, but he told him, you know, that they were, that, Sammy works hard, he's a good worker. And the dad's kind of surprised, like, oh, like, Sammy's been working for you? And then Sammy's trying to be kind of like, hush, hush. And then, like, the dad doesn't say much about it, but, you can tell there's some tension at work about that. And then, yeah, at the end, Sammy comes back after they get, they kind of get caught at the airport. The Hasidic couples get caught at the airport when they're leaving, and then Sammy kind of gets through security because he doesn't look like them either, and so he just goes through really quickly, and just tries to find Yosef somewhere in Amsterdam. He finds him, or maybe they're in New York by this time. I think they're in New York by this time, and he tries to find him, couldn't find him. Yosef says some weird comment like, oh, we'll just drive through the night and keep driving a few days and go to the West Coast. I have a cousin there. And then, Sammy's kind of like, wait, like, that doesn't sound like a legit idea, And so, he, it seems like Yosef is kind of just doing his own thing. And, Sammy eventually goes back to near his house. He doesn't go to his actual house. He goes to the neighbor's house where Yosef's brother, who's about his own age, the guy who married the Lazar daughter, he goes over to that house, and he's kind of like, I need help. Like, he says that to the guy, and he's like, I just wanted you to know I did go to your wedding, and I need help. He was trying to like be more open about like, okay, like, I'm in a bad situation right now. And you hear the police sirens coming, and they're closer and closer and closer. And then, like, at the end, you see kind of like the information that they write on the screen that like Yosef and the main boss, they got like 16 years or 18 years or something in jail. The lady that was kind of pulling Sammy's leg about like trying to like lead him on and stuff in Amsterdam, she got 1 year in prison. And Sammy and the other Hasidic Jews got 28 months, not years, 28 months in, what is it, like a federal boot camp? And so, that was the result. And you see at the end, Sammy's wearing the orange jumpsuit, and he's kind of walking with a book in his hand, and you see his father there with him, and so it looks like they reconciled. His father came to visit him, and they probably were talking, like they were kind of talking, so it sounds like things were on good terms. I mean, at that point, it's kind of like there's nothing you can do. He gets caught. He's kind of down on his luck, all the stuff with his status and his community and not getting the women that he wants and not being considered like attractive or somebody that other people are desiring, or getting the jobs that he wants to have offered. Like, he doesn't seem to have the status in the community that other people are kind of wanting him to have and stuff like that. I mean, that he wants himself to have, because people are kind of making these decisions based on what they see about him, so it just seems like a very challenging lifestyle, to say the least. But yeah, I really liked rewatching that. I've seen it so many times. I think I gave a really confusing explanation of this whole movie and spoiler, but some of the things that really stuck out to me were really the money part, because I think a lot of times that can be something that, if you don't have specific goals with it, and just like a vision with it, it can get to a point where there's never enough, Now, I don't think there's anything wrong with striving for more, trying to make life better, almost playing the game like, okay, like, let's see how much I can actually get as an income and that kind of thing. I see nothing wrong with that whatsoever. But there is a fine line between letting the money get to you or letting it get in the way of, your integrity, your relationships, your choices, your decisions. Like, it's really a fine line sometimes. And another thing about religion and traditions, sometimes, they can be a bit on the limiting end. Like, if Sammy wasn't a Hasidic Jew, he would have probably had a lot more freedom to go just choose a different job and work somewhere else and do something else and just get a job somewhere else. I don't know if that's permitted or not, but one thing I did hear in a documentary somewhere about why a lot of Hasidic Jews would prefer to own their own businesses is, it does give them a lot of religious freedom as well, because, they can shut down their shops whenever they need to do that. They can, have their religious holy days when they need to do that. Nothing's really going to be conflicting with their religion unless they make it conflict with their religion. I think I've mentioned this before. I really like this YouTube channel called Living L'Chaim. Living L'Chaim. It's a lot about finances, but it's usually Orthodox Jews talking about finances and money and business and stuff like that. It's a different cultural outlook, because I think in a lot of mainstream Western American culture that's not religious, that's not Orthodox Jewish, people kind of just decide that they're going to do what they're going to do. There's nobody in charge that's telling you, okay, you're part of our group, so even if you go to a church or something, you don't have your pastor telling you what type of job you're going to do, who you're going to start dating, who might be prospective people for you to marry. Like, usually people aren't that involved in one another's lives unless they're close friends or family. And so there is a lot more freedom and flexibility to kind of make things work, but then also there's not that community that kind of makes sure that, like, everybody kind of has something and is kind of taken care of, and that there's other people that might have different insights into your life than what you might have on your own. There's other people who might see you in a different light or see different aspects of you that might actually maybe not necessarily know better than you do, but might have a different perspective on things that could be helpful for you. And then there's not really usually that much involvement. So that's one thing. And like another thing is too, like I think it's not uncommon for people to get involved in stuff where it's like, maybe this isn't such a good idea, but kind of knowing your limits and knowing when it's too much, knowing when when you maybe went a little too far, or did a little too much, whether that's making bad financial decisions or bad decisions with work or with substances or with relationships or anything along those lines. Sometimes things just go too far, and there is just like kind of how the movie shows, there is kind of that line where it's like you can always step back, and it's not too late, and then there is that kind of line where it's very blurred between like when it's not too late to come back and then when it's too far gone to come back, and then something has to hit rock bottom for things to kind of come back, right? So and I don't really even think, of course that's a sucky situation for anyone to deal with, for sure, but I don't necessarily think it's always bad, because a lot of times people come out of it better. They come out of it more just better, just in a better place, doing the better things, just everything just kind of better, and so that's kind of how I've kind of seen it, how things have kind of gone for a lot of people. And I think it's a very relatable movie. I don't find that many movies that are very relatable for both maybe people who might be religious and people who might not be religious. I kind of like it when there's movies that kind of hit both dynamics on the extremes, and that's kind of one thing that draws me towards like ultra religious cultures, like the Amish, like ultra Orthodox Jews, is because they are kind of an extreme of a religion, to a point where there's like people choosing what you're doing and what you're not doing, what they prefer for you and stuff like that. There's a lot more people involved versus completely secular extreme lifestyles where it's like people just kind of do whatever they're doing. And it's not to say that one's better or worse than the other. People on all sides can get caught up in things that really aren't good for them, that aren't good for their families, that aren't good for people around them. People can get caught up. Anybody can get caught up. And I think that's kind of what I get from this type of story, is that anyone can get caught up. It's hard to really know sometimes like where that fine line is, where it's best to kind of stop the dabbling, and not get in too deep. And then even just things like boundary setting, when there's somebody that you just kind of gotta let go. Like you could tell in this father's situation when he kind of told Sammy, like, you gotta get out of my house, you gotta leave. Like when that stove came, he was like, you gotta leave. Like, what are you doing? Like, somebody came here looking for a gun. What are you doing? Like, you're bringing crime around my house, and like you're lying to me, and like you've got to go, you got to get out. Like, I'm not gonna look at you, you're not my son, just like get out of my house. And you could tell there was pain for both of them. Sammy trying to lie to his dad to save himself and say like, no, I don't want to like disappoint him and like say that this bad stuff is actually going on. And then the dad just being like, oh man, like you can't even own up to it. Like, I already know the truth. Like, I'm pretty sure they went through his room and saw that there was money and saw that there was all this other stuff. It's like, you know, like, they probably know that he's got these other clothes, that he's got these other sneakers, that he's got, like, wads and wads of cash, unless he's keeping it in a bank. It's like, you know, everybody kind of knows. So, yeah, I really find this movie refreshing. It's one of those movies that I really like. It's kind of a bittersweet kind of thing, but it's a movie that I really enjoy. And, I would recommend it to anybody, even though I just spoiled the whole thing, but I hope that nobody that was gonna watch this that doesn't like spoilers, that was gonna listen to I hope that no one that was gonna actually watch this movie that doesn't like spoilers wasn't like listening to this whole thing and then like, dang, like you screwed up the whole movie. Like, I tried to explain that this is a spoiler. I don't know how many different ways I can say it that, I'm literally going to spoil the whole movie, and I just did. I mean, it's definitely, I don't think I gave the best explanation, but I did like the concepts in it, kind of the things that I got out of it. Sometimes I try to think about, like, why am I so drawn to this movie? Because there's some movies I'm just drawn to, and that's one of them. It's one of my, I don't know if it's one of my favorite movies, but I've watched it, like, probably 6 times, 7 times. Like, I like it a lot. So, yeah, check it out. Holy Rollers, if you haven't seen it yet, if you still want to see it, or if you have seen it, if you want to watch it again, maybe you'll get different things out of it compared to what I said. Maybe the same exact things, I don't know. There's probably some kind of commentary or something where, the actual directors are, like, talking about it and stuff, but, yeah, I like the movie a lot. It's a cool one. But for now, thanks for listening.